Welcome back to Hands-On Analytics, Episode 2. My name is Trace Marks. I'm your host, and tonight I am joined with Terry Risley, who comes to us with an extensive background in risk management, and we are very fortunate to have him on our team. And in this video podcast thing, we sit down for about an hour and talk through the world of risk management and what that means, and how tools like Alteryx's Auto Insights can be very helpful to the world that is risk management. Terry comes to us from some of the largest financial institutions in the world, so he's seen a lot of this, and he's really a great resource for us to lean on these things. So it was a pleasure to sit down and talk to him and to help expand our knowledge around the analytic world we live in. And we like to deliver that through these long form podcasts, video things. And I'm actually going to probably put this both on my personal one and our DCG channel so that we get some more exposure and everyone can see these. So thank you for joining us. Without any further ado, Terry Risley. Golly, I can't believe I messed it up at the end. Terry Risley, Hands-On Analytics, number 2, risk management. We were going to get together to talk about building use cases for risk management. You come with a lot of experience, and you've been doing this for longer than you care to admit via your own quote there. Can you give us a real quick background on your experience there and kind of your idea about what we want to do here, and then we'll go.
Yeah, and I've had about 35, 40 years in risk management, partially in audit and sometimes in the second line, mostly around financial institutions. And my role as an auditor or risk management expert has kind of evolved over the last 15 years into using analytics in the risk management space. And as of late, risk management, analytics and risk management is now taking a whole new leap into, as most people are, into AI, and how can we leverage AI to be more effective risk managers in organizations. And so I've spent a lot of time building analytics analysis, using tools and stuff like that on my own, gathering the data and stuff like that, and have used various tools. One of the tools I've used in the past is Alteryx. It's been real effective in kind of building up those processes, those ETL processes, as well as building dashboards and those types of things through other tools. But now, what's happening in the risk management space is, like any organizations or departments through organizations, everybody's trying to see how we can leverage this new thing called AI, right? And how can we make us more effective in risk management through this tool? And so, I'm working here with Trayson as Alteryx has got a tool called Auto Insights, which is, kind of played as an AI tool, but it's pretty powerful. And so as Trayson and I were working together, we'd like to share kind of how easy it is to get started as a risk management expert, maybe not as a data analyst or a data science expert, or someone that can build a model or bring large amounts of data that you need, typically in AI, how you can leverage a tool like this in your space to help you leapfrog and get a really good head start into it. And some of the issues around it, some of the challenges as well. None of these things are a silver bullet. So that's what we were going to walk through here today. So with that said, Tracy, let's kind of step through.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. And for those who aren't familiar at home, Alteryx is a data and analytics platform, and it does, like Terry mentioned, it does a really good job at like the ETL doing that, not necessarily within a database or specific to any one database, but you can do flat files and things like that. So they have another product that they've released called Auto Insights. And we're going to kind of run through that today. So here from the cloud platform, we have Auto Insights, and they have a tool called Playbooks that allows us to so what Auto Insights generally does is you feed it a data set, and then it just kind of runs through that data set and says like, okay, here are some things we can do with that data set. So when we talk about where risk management or even really anybody can leverage AI, we really want to be talking about currently August 2024. AI is really good at like accelerating your speed to insight. It isn't, like you mentioned, a silver bullet, so it's not going to solve all of these problems for us. The problem since the birth of analytics, like the problem always comes back to like, is your data good? And so if your data is crap, then all AI isn't going to solve your data problems. You still have to have like the engineers or the analysts or whoever on the back end to put data sets together for you. In this playbook tool, what it does is allows us to put together like a scenario, and we're going to use that scenario to create some insights. So like again, accelerating our like, okay, oh, actually these are things we want to look at, or this is what our data set needs to look like, and then we're going to use that to kind of build out a demo. So let's talk about a role. What's like a role and like a situation that I should put in here, Terry?
So let's look at it from a chief risk officer's perspective.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is let's look at wire transfer transactions. Maybe let's say on a daily basis. Let's go ahead and try to get wire transfer transactions, daily transactions to help evaluate, any anomalies in daily wire transfer transactions or flag.
Yeah, let's see what this daily wire transactions for chief risk officer. Cool. So it's going to just go through this. It's going to identify a scenario. Let me ask you though, like for you, while this is running, like you as someone who's from this space, like how do you currently decide like where you want to look at as far as risk? Is your industry traditionally been very like reactive, more so than like?
Well, what traditionally would happen here is that we would have an audit plan that says we need to look at wire transfers every year because it's a high risk area, and we want to look at certain controls, make sure they're functioning properly. And so we're going to test those controls. So we have a predefined, usually, test plan that says, let's look at these 12 controls and test them. So what I would do is I would go out and grab transaction data over that 12-month period. I would do a sample of those transactions, and then I would go manually test those things, like who authorized those transactions? Are they authorized for that limit? Did the proper ones get rejected that should have been rejected? A bunch of questions we could say. Is the volume? What's the average volume? So I see peaks and analysis here. So that's what I would typically do. And so that takes a lot of legwork, right? It takes a lot of time and effort to do that. And we're only doing a sample of the data. So what happens a lot of times is those needle in the haystacks, those big high risk outliers, don't really get identified unless they so happen to be in the sample of transactions that we select. So that's typically how we would approach it as an auditor. From a risk management standpoint, I would just say, hey, does it look like the volume's going through? Are we complying with the regs? Those types of things. And again, it's a very manual, intensive process for the risk management and compliance folks as well. Okay.
It's all very interesting. It's not my world, so it's fun to like hear about a lot of this stuff, because I have questions on like, okay, when you talk about controls, like how do you set up these controls? Is it like a change in like how the entire business works, then that creates new controls, or these things that are pushed down from some sort of like governing body? Like how does all that work? And we'll get into that in a second. Let's which one of these do we want to go to?
What came up here is a real good perspective of what I was telling you. So these are like 4 different perspectives of what I would look at depending on my role. Like the operational risk assessment, that's probably an auditor and a second line risk manager's role. The regulatory compliance is obviously the compliance area that would be functional on that. The fraud detection, of course, every bank has got a fraud detection organization to make sure that we don't go through money laundering and all that kind of things. And then capital adequacy. Again, you're going to have these risk models on making sure that we have adequate capital to cover these transactions and whatnot. So this is all kind of getting a good perspective. So let's select one of those. Let's see what we get out of the operate. Let's go start with the operational risk management upper level there.
Okay. So what it's going to do real quick, just technically, it's creating a data set for us. Now, unfortunately, we can't export the whole data set. So we're going to have to use another AI tool to generate some like a full data set, but it does give us metadata about it. So we can generate that pretty easily. So we'll look at that when this is done, and then it's going to build a bunch of reports and it's going to allow us to choose like a timeline that we want to look at those things.
So right now, I'm sorry, Tyson. So right now it's going out to basically the cloud and seeing what kind of data samples they can get, and then it's going to be creating kind of a mocked up data. In your case, if you're using this inside your organization, it would go to your actual live transactions. Is that correctly?
No. So if this was within your organization, what we would have done ahead of this is created a data set within Auto Insights. So if you notice here, there's this data set section, and I would have loaded a data set in here, whether that's a live connection to something like Databricks or Snowflake or SQL Server or Oracle or whatever, that creates a data set, or like we have to predefine data sets. Again, and this goes back to that whole, like, this isn't a silver bullet because we're not solving the data problem. We're just solving the analysis problem on top of your data that you've already set up for this sort of thing.
So what you're kind of using, we can use this for, is kind of an ID generator. So
yeah.
This will give you an idea of the types of things you may want to think about once you do start using your live production data kind of thing to do your analysis. But this will give you a good idea of what kind of things you should be thinking about.
Exactly. And so what it's done here is it's generated 4 different, it's going to give us all of these, but it's like, hey, which one of these do we want to look at first? And when we click generate report, it'll be like, do we want to see a daily, a weekly, a monthly, a quarterly report? So I think you had mentioned daily.
Right.
Before I click this, I do want to note some other things here. This is giving us like a suitable audiences, and then like talking about key benefits and operational risk. But ultimately, and most importantly, what we're talking about for this conversation, it gives us a data set structure. So like these are all of the fields that were created for this. And again, these don't necessarily have to line up to something you would actually see in an organization. But again, it's, when we talk speed to insights, it's like giving you an idea of how you want this data to be structured. You could use this as a starting point to go to your engineers and say, like, hey, what do we have that looks like this? And then also, let's say you have like audit teams or whatever, and you're like, oh, also add our audit teams so that we understand who's in charge of this and who's not seeing, like, etc. Whatever that looks like, you can add that to this. I'm going to download this structure because I'm going to use it later for a chat GPT thing. But let's click here. Let's do a daily report of the post-error transaction outcome analysis. Is what I assume post-error means, like, is that like a after an error happens, like a posting an error?
Yeah, I guess that's what's looking at. So yeah, and this is good, and this will give a demonstration of what I would have typically, in most departments, would probably take months of time and effort, and showing you how it could turn it into weeks. Of effort to get you to the point where you're jumping in. As you can see in this demonstration, we're getting to the point of maybe analyzing and really asking some key questions out of this pretty quickly, just within this presentation here. So you can imagine what this would take outside, using tools like this.
Yeah, I'm actually super curious. Let's see. It's gonna have to run again. Can you talk me through like a process of, like, as an audit or as a risk manager, like what is that analytic process? Like, how do you decide what you need? So you talked about things like doing tests against data sets, or well, actually, something even kind of a bigger question. You had mentioned, like, how do we make sure, like, sometimes people make transactions that are bigger than they should, or they get loan amounts that are bigger than they really are. Can you talk a little bit? How does that happen? Like, how does that happen in this world? Like, what's the Like, what's the importance of your, beyond just like looking for fraudulent activity, like, why do you need to exist for just like people not doing things correctly? Or like, does that make sense, kind of where I'm trying to go with that question?
Yeah, and it'd probably be best just to kind of give you an example of what we go through as risk managers. So we, as experts in risk, know what the risks are around a given process. So wire transfer is obviously large amounts of money moving very quickly from inside to outside the organization. And one of the key controls, so what we look through is we want to make sure it's done accurately, completely, and that the transactions are properly authorized, right? So those are the key objectives we're trying to satisfy. And to satisfy those objectives, we look for certain controls within a process that says, this is going to ensure it's accurate, this control is going to ensure it's complete, and this control is going to ensure, or set of controls are going to ensure that it's authorized properly, right? So let's take authorized, for example. Let's say we have $100 million wire transfer transaction. Only certain people have the authorization limits to authorize anything over 100,000. So one of the tests we would do is we would sample a bunch of 100 million and above, I said 100,000, 100 million and above transactions and see who authorized that. And an exception would be that somebody authorized it that didn't have the approval limits for that transaction. So that's a risk to us, because as a bank, if that fails or something happens along the road and that control wasn't followed, then that bank's on the hook for that $100 million fraudulent transaction, right? So that's kind of the whole process from end to end.
Why wouldn't there be something in place during that acceptance process, or that would keep them from even being able to, like, if their limit isn't high enough, why is the approval button even allow them to click through on it? It does them,
and that's
kind of,
that's a very good control. So there's certain controls that are manual, some controls that are reactive controls, like, hey, a fraud happened and I'm going to do a post-analysis review and correct that fraud. And then there's systematic controls. Like, I build into a security system that says this person is only allowed to approve transactions over a certain dollar limit. That's not going to fail, right? It's a system, it's built into the system. The system's not going to allow them to approve, like you were saying. What you find sometimes is ways to circumvent that control. All right. So, for example, I found one organization where somebody was handing off their ID and user password to somebody when they went on vacation, and then that person consistently was approving it on their behalf. So they had their access limits of another person, but it was another person's ID that was showing up on the approval stamp, right? So it's things like that can happen sometimes, but you're right. A lot of times we'll find out if it's a system control, then we don't have to retest that. There's no way that's going to happen. But all of a sudden we're looking in the analysis side, we're stepping into analytics, and we're starting to see certain people authorizing transactions. That's that needle in the haystack, right? We may have not picked that transaction in our sample, but if we did 100% of it through analytics, we then see, okay, this is a needle. This is a little red dot out there that we saw. So that's where AI and analytics really improves the audit process or the risk management process significantly, is we've now are able to, in seconds, mine through millions of transactions that used to take us weeks to mine through 12, 15, 15 sample transactions, because we have this automation, we have this technology now in our hands.
One of the things I just want to make sure that I understood correctly is that, like, traditionally the whole process is we can, because of limitations to technology or to just the people hours, right? Like, you could only do an audit on a sample set of data, but with tools like Alteryx or AI or whatever, like, the idea is that you should be able to run it on your entire data set and all of your transactions instead of just like a set of those transactions. Is that correct?
Right. So we wrote a process routine that says, show me transactions over this amount compared to the authorization limits of these individuals, and flag something red that doesn't meet that criteria, and then you can drill down on that red and not have to worry about all those other 10 million transactions that happen and work just as they were supposed to, right? The authorizations work just as they're supposed to. So that's really the shift here. Is the shift is one, I can hit a button now through a programmatic process built in Alteryx, for example, that does that test on all the transactions and does it in milliseconds or maybe 30 seconds versus, okay, now I've got to go to that file, select a transaction. Now I've got to go to another file to see their authorization limits, and then I've got to talk to the people that says, there's all that process that takes time when you're manually chasing from file to file to file, kind of thing. So now I've got the capabilities. I can't pull up an Excel spreadsheet and look at a million transactions and do those tests, in my head. Frankly, I now can build it into a low-code technology tool, right? Or I can, use AI, this auto insights now, to look at it and say, okay, this just doesn't look right. This is out of the norm. And that's what we'll see in a minute in some of these reports. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's killer. Thank you for setting the stage for that. And now the reports are ready to go, so I'm going to bring them up. But thank you again for setting the stage for sort of like why this, to the layman such as myself who doesn't work in risk and audit, it helps really paint the picture of what we're doing here. So, I click on Open Daily Report. And this is what we're seeing. So error type overview, financial impact by error type, post-error transaction outcomes, and severity analysis by error type.
So an auditor would use this as a pre-audit step. So when they're doing their planning stage, they're going to look at all this information and say, okay, is there a particular area that looks like it's having some weird activity, strange activity, or things that I may want to question during my audit? And saying, why does this peak? Why does this stuff? And you're given an auditor insights that they've never had before, right? Just by running this a little bit. And let's step into the second line, which is kind of the compliance and risk management stage, is that they're going to be monitoring this on a more frequent basis to make sure their operations is running as intended. So if I've got unusual transactions, or I see more errors coming from a different country or a different customer, a different third party, then I can jump on that quickly rather than waiting for an audit department to come in and tell me I've got a problem here, right? So this is valuable on many fronts across the organization, and it just depends who you are and how you'll use this to help you do your job more effectively. And this is just mind-blowing, really, to be honest with you, just to see how quickly this can come up. I mean, to have these tools 10 years ago, I would have died for, right?
Yeah.
And being able to sit down with the auditee, let's say, and have a very valuable discussion and understanding what's happening in their environment before they even know it, which adds value to us as auditors that we never brought to the plate before. Or, reverse that and say a risk manager says, hey, I've got an audit come up. Hey, we've been reviewing these reports every month to make sure our controls are working and we don't have any outliers. And when we did see them, here's the action we took. If I could have that conversation with the auditor's going to say, hey, you've got this well managed. The process is going to be a lot easier. Audit's a painful thing for operational people to go through. So if I can say, hey, I'm on top of this with an auditor, the auditor is going to be less, what's the word I'm looking at? Trying to find a kind word, but less troublesome to the operations with an expansive audit. They're going to feel comfortable that they've got this stuff under control. So to be in that position as a second line auditee is extremely valuable. And go ahead.
Sorry, can you explain the first, second, and third line real quickly?
Yeah.
Or actually, let's table that. Let's talk about that after this, and let's go through some of these results, and then that's a conversation I want to have beyond this.
Okay.
So let's look at these. Do we want to look at financial impact? This is actually really interesting, like a financial impact by error type. Maybe this is like, how do we decide which one of these that we're gonna do or which we're gonna focus on? So like delayed processing, like that has increased by $38,000 over the last day. Now, again, to note, this is like a day over day kind of comparison. If we want to do like weekly or monthly, it would give us a different type of view, but currently we're just looking at daily. Do any of these look interesting that we want to dive into maybe a little bit further? Severity analysis by error type,
post-error transaction outcomes.
I like this delayed processing loss. I saw something there when you were flicking through it, just talking about
here.
delayed process.
All right, so let's click on we can now like dive into this page here. And so again, what's cool, like, so there's all these like author notes about this, and here's just like a bunch of key changes. It says like, hey, here's some like real, most error type decreased except technical glitch, whatever this is, and delayed processing, both of these increased. And so again, quick insights on your data set. You can also further dive into this. I'm trying to remember how to do it. Like if I clicked on this, you can look at like distribution, etc. You can dive further into these. Like if you oh yeah, that's it. So if you click in here, you can also find like other things that are associated with these. So these are the error impacts, and then if you want to see like what part of the transaction phase you normally see this, or the currency where you're seeing this happen in currency or whatever, you can kind of dive further into this. So this isn't just like, hey, here's the key indicator, right? It's also like you could do a root cause analysis through this tool. So it's like, okay, diving further into my data based on what I've got, what are the things that I see within this insufficient funds error or delayed processing error? So if I think I can click on this one. Yeah. So I click on delayed processing. I can see like, okay, the number one Paris, and of course this is 1 day, so it's just going to have like one value for this. But if we're looking like a month over month or whatever, and there's a lot more of these transactions, or rather day over day would probably be fine in a large institution where you're having, let's say, millions of transactions a day. So you still have a giant data set to look at it, but this is a tiny data set, which is what I'm trying to get at here. But the idea being that you can now see like the specifics of what goes into all of this. So like Paris was the bank branch that we saw most of these from, and they're in Australian dollars, and business is the account type, etc. So like, again, it's not just, here's your problem, go figure it out. It's like, here's your problem, and then like, okay, well, here's the things within that problem that affected that big problem. And again, it's quick, and it all happened for us fairly quickly.
What's mind blowing about this, and just looking at this stuff and the things that are rolling around this empty head of mine, is basically the amazement of how, just through that query that we did, how in the heck did it find this information? How did it know to get this information? I think it gets back to your point about, the integrity of the data and stuff like that. But, it's going to be interesting how, what kind of data did they pull, for example, to find out that it was a technical a blip that happened at so-and-so point kind of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how we take this and say, okay, now we were using mocked up data. What kind of data did we pull that allowed me to do this analysis, and where can I find this within my own organization to hopefully, put these, connect these dots between an error in a transaction and what was the cause, what was the root cause, or what was the pinpoint of that type of thing. So this is, I mean, if this can, if we can translate this into, or when we can translate this against production data, it's going to be interesting to see how that works.
Yes, it will. And there are customers that are using this. It's just it's a fairly new product, or I'd say probably in the last 8 months, people have been like excited about this. AI, it's crazy. Like 3 years ago, I want to say 3 years ago, maybe even two, like how far we've come in 2 years with AI is insane. Like I remember like the early DALL-E things where it'd be like you put in a picture and it would just like generate these random images based on but it's getting so good right now. And if you saw my downloads earlier, I was doing some of that with my son earlier and he likes whales and squids and stuff like that. And so we were like him hanging out with the squid, and I mean, it's like cartoons, but it's still like really fun to like the whole world is. So all that being said, is this even a capability 2 or 3 years ago? I mean, not much less 10 years ago, which is what you asked. Like how, like people don't know what they don't know. So like this tool, yes, it's amazing and it's cool, but like there's what's real out there. I've spent a lot of my last 6 months probably just like figuring out how to like sift through sift through the garbage of AI, if you will? Like, how do we here, hold on. Like, how do we understand what's real about AI, and how do we really get good at using it within businesses? And for example, we had a business come to us and say, "Hey, we want to use AI to do all of your accounting functions," and because my business partner Eric, Eric is like really, he's really good at accounting, and he understands that world, and he just like started like asking questions of them, like, okay, well, wait, how are you doing this in AI? And like, and then ultimately it came down to, oh, actually they have a bunch of people in the Philippines that are doing a lot of this work for them, and it looks like AI. And so it was like, oh, that felt really it was disingenuous. But then also, like, there was the Amazon thing. Like, do you remember a few years ago, Amazon said that we're going to have this store that you can walk in and walk out, and it charges you automatically. And really what it was is that there were a bunch of people at a call center somewhere watching videos of people, and then they were putting things in their cart and then charging them based on like what they saw pick up. So
I look at it. Go ahead.
No. So I was just saying, so it's important that we understand really what is real in this technology space as we approach it as a business. A healthy level of skepticism. The best way, I think, to adopt or to even like decide what you want to do with AI is find a very specific function and pursue that with AI, and not be like, yeah, we can solve all things in AI. It's like, actually, we are going to use AI to, in this example, to quickly comb through all of our transactions to find outliers in that transaction. Where again, we're doing that already. But on a sample data set, or it takes a data scientist or someone with a lot of experience, a long time to do it. But now we can just speed that process up.
And that's I kind of look at it from another perspective too. Is what would this take me to create organically within my organization, within an organization, to get the ability to do all this? Would take years within an organization to pull the data analyst, to get the database established, to do all these things that a tool can do for us now. And it may not be perfect, but it's going to give us a leapfrog capability to say, okay, let's start with this. This is going to give us the capability to test out the concepts and see this and be smarter about the way we do our work. Even if it isn't perfect, it's going to show us and get us quicker to that answer, what we need to do to get there, right? So I think from now is not to be afraid of it and skeptical of it, but see how we can leverage it and use it to grow it organically within our organization and build it. Similar to this company, the way I understood it was Alteryx bought this company that's been building this tool for years now, and they actually acquired the organization and incorporated it into their tool suites, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So even then, they realized that they couldn't build this organically into their tool, and they decided to incorporate that, go out and buy it, and figure out a way to incorporate it into their tool, how it can improve their customers' abilities to leverage the AI. So again, to me, it's how can we get closer to the end goal? What we're trying to do is be more effective risk managers. Yeah. Because many organizations are getting tired of reacting to a big fine or a shutdown by the regulators because we weren't good enough to detect this in time that we didn't have a big problem come up, or many banks have failed because of a control breakdown, right? Yeah. And we can talk about many banks that have, at a minimum, have customer service issues, right? And reputational hits and stuff like that. Not to mention, maybe fines they've got, $100 million fines, but they realize that they have to do it. In banks today, the chief risk officer can be liable personally if the controls aren't effective within their organization and they didn't do the things their due diligence and everything. So the pain point has gotten much higher for this, and we can no longer do risk management the same way we've always done it. So that's the way my perspective is. It's something like this is just going to put many organizations leap years ahead of where they're at today. and what their capabilities are today.
Leap year, streets ahead.
Yeah.
Streets. That's awesome, Terry. That's super insightful. I'm just trying to think of all the different like people we could talk to about this. This is like why I love my job and why I love consulting. It's just that like my background is accounts receivable, or actually, yeah, that was the first thing I did out of college, and then I got into analytics, and now I'm having conversations like this, like risk and manufacturing and site selection and all these cool things that I'm having conversations about, and I just love hearing it, and it really lets me nerd out.
Yeah, and the beauty of Alteryx is that I can take those kind of outliers, and I can build a process to test how frequently do those outliers happen, or I can design my audit program to automate 75, 80% of my test of those controls to run that and see it. And I can change dynamically based on that analysis of my plan. I can dynamically change my test to say, okay, before we used to do a $500 million limit on our sample. Now I can tweak it down to 100 million, or maybe I tweak it down to a particular region or that type of thing. So I can do my analysis and my audit or my risk management analysis in real time. So I can just start asking this thing question after question and drill down until I say, here's the root of the problem, right? Here, and that's what you want as a risk manager. You want to get to what the root cause is, right? Is it lack of education? Is it a control missing? Is it a systematic control that wasn't designed properly? X, Y, and Z. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into areas where we have audited them for decades. They've come back with a clean bill of health. I now use analytics and I look at 100% of the data, and I'm able to tweak the transactions and do this analysis, and they come back with red flags right, left, and center. And you talk about a value there. Yeah, it's a hit on that organization, but I'd much rather know that now or realize eventually that for 10 years I haven't been doing the right tests, or I haven't been tweaking, or I haven't been proactive enough in the change in what's happening in those environments to find the next risk that's coming down the board. I mean, give customer service. I mean, I would imagine this tool, we could probably do sentiment analysis, right? Create a Python, whatever, do some sentiment analysis in the process and get a bunch of unstructured data and at the hands of an auditor say, okay, where are we having the worst hit? Imagine if Wells Fargo had a tool like that before their credit card debacle, right? You probably would have seen in that sentiment analysis ahead of time that they had an issue with reputational risk.
Yeah.
And reputational risk is always a difficult thing in audit to audit, right? You didn't have the tools. It was kind of this nebulous thing. So how do you measure reputation and all that kind of stuff? And now with these types of things, you can really get into some of these things, and then just the sky's the limit with this in my mind with some of these things. I mean, we're touching on wire transfers. You could hit cybersecurity, you could hit compliance regs, all these kind of things. It's really what I think, we're going. And, we could do it with healthcare. We could do it, you can do it in all kinds of organizations, because wherever risk lie, I think something like this would really help.
This tool doesn't do specifically sentiment analysis, not yet anyway, but sentiment analysis, there are other tools to do that.
Yeah.
Churning through large amounts of sentiment of like comment data can be laborious, if you will, but much faster than us doing it by hand. But yes, Alteryx has other products to do that. Or again, you could use ChatGPT or something to actually, you know what? Exactly. That's a really good, I am going to change topics on that.
Okay, great.
I want to create, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I use ChatGPT, again, in the AI space, like how I use ChatGPT to, again, accelerate my like analysis or insights. So if I were to say something like, I have a data set that is, let's say transactions. Oh, am I sharing? I am sharing. Okay, sorry. Data set that is just dang it, how do I want about this? I have a series of customer feedback comments, and I would like to run a sentiment analysis on them. Can you create for me a Python script that would allow me to do this? And there are, when I do something like this, let me jump back. I did a Monte Carlo simulation. I'm familiar with a Monte Carlo simulation, as I know why you use it, but I've never actually like written a Monte Carlo simulation. And as a developer, as a non-data scientist, but someone who can kind of ask, I think I can ask the right questions, I use ChatGPT to say like, okay, I have this data set I want to run, or I have this scenario I want to run a Monte Carlo simulation, and then it starts writing it for me. It's like, yep, this is actually a perfect reason you would use a Monte Carlo simulation, and it helps teach me about, like, oh, it uses Vader. This is actually the same thing that Alteryx uses, but the idea is that it ChatGPT was really good for walking me through, sort of like, it became very conversational about like, hey, this is what this is why you would want to do these things. And I could ask it like, okay, if I want to add these factors, or if I want to have weighted buckets in my analysis, can I do that? And it's like, yep. And then it would just like add it to the code as I ask these questions. And so now, of course, because I'm not like a data scientist, and it's as right as the internet is, or whatever trained it is going to allow it to be. So there are definitely, well, there are some risks to this, but again, we're talking about not necessarily giving me a finished product, but like a speed to like, okay, I've now gone through that whole first part of the development cycle, and now I need someone who really knows what they're doing, maybe to audit the work that I've done, or have a conversation about, so but anyway, so here's an example, like, so okay, yep, it just did this, and I pulled this entire thing here, and here's like the steps. Important to note is I always like want to make sure, because I still don't trust the computers yet, but like I just want to make sure it's not like sending my data somewhere and I'm looking what I know about Python. It doesn't look like it's doing anything like that. But here's the steps, and then here's like how you can do additional things. But again, so like this all comes down to an interesting anecdote. And I think, as far as like in this might be able to wrap up our AI conversation, or maybe it will expand it into something else. But I have a buddy who works at a large bank in New York, and they consulted on someone who helped create Google's AI. And one of the things that person had kind of come to them with, and was a takeaway from this consultation, is he said essentially that, like, at my organization, I would make sure everybody is using some AI every day, because it's never going to be dumber than it is right now, even tomorrow. So today is 8, tomorrow is 8.9, 8.9. It will be smarter than 8.8, and it will never be as dumb as it was on 8.8 again. So like, it's just going to get better. So use it, and they've made it this like a thing within their organization. It's like, okay, everybody should be using it, and if people aren't using it, then it's like they're like, this is how you get people out. Like, okay, this is our initiative. These are our goals. Get good at this. I also heard the other day from somebody I know who works for Microsoft. She does support of some of like the what's it called, the Copilot tools, and some of the interesting feedback that they got is that organizations, like, if they don't have Copilot implemented, they were getting rejected by recent college grad applicants. So like, college students understand the value of a tool like Copilot, because they understand that it's going to make them better at what they do, and people using it right now within their organizations are going to have a leg up. Like, it's the new way to develop as an employee. So in 5 years, if I've been using Copilot and you haven't been using Copilot, and whatever the next round of technology in this space is requires an understanding of like prompt augmentation, or how to or when I say prompt augmentation, I mean like how to correctly ask questions of the AI. And now I've got 5 years of experience using something like Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever. It's going to be a lot more helpful than not having it. So
Yeah.
all that being said, it's just going to become part of our everyday life. And really, it's probably been part of our everyday life for longer than we'd care to admit. Like, for example, all of everything you have on your computer that's like, oh, did you mean to use accept instead of accept here, or stuff like that? Like checking your data, like checking your, like Word documents when you're typing it up, making sure your spelling is correctly, using the right commas. Like, that is not the type of AI we're seeing today, but in the same vein, like that's stuff that's just been used in our life, for a long time, and now it's just getting more and more powerful. Anyway, so that's
you touched on a very important point: is talent acquisition. You want to be, encourage and invite the best and brightest. You're going to need to be innovative. You're going to know to show that you're being innovative, and here's the things we're doing. Be innovative, and this will allow you to probably not only attract good talent, but also retain some of your best. Because somebody that wants to evolve and evaluate, they don't want to sit in the same box, for their career. They're inspired to really innovate, and this will give you the capabilities to demonstrate that to your own people as well as people coming outside. So that's a very good point on the talent side of things too.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit more about audit in your space and kind of other ways that you can find this useful. Can you go back to the whole first, second, and third line of audit again and kind of chat through that? Give me a little bit more structure of this space, and then
okay.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes from there.
So the 3 lines of defense, or the term that's used, comes from the first line of defense is the people that are in there day in, day out. So in our example, the wire transfer, they're the ones executing the wires, approving the wires, doing the day-to-day activities. So that's the first line of defense. They're working at let's say, more of a transaction level basis and making sure those controls are adhered to and applying properly and all that type of stuff. So they've got the ultimate responsibility to make sure that every transaction functions and happens as it's intended. The second line of defense, they're the risk management departments, the compliance department, the operational process and procedures. So they develop the policies and procedures. They look at the processes and make sure the controls are designed and implemented in that function. So they have a much kind of a second level view of it. So they're up a little higher on the mountain. They're going to take more of a weekly to monthly view, sometimes an annual view of information. So basically, they're responsible, they're hands-on with the design and implementation of controls and making sure that the new compliance rules and regulations are addressed and implemented. And then the third line is the audit department. They're an independent of all transactions. They're going to come in once a year, maybe once every 6 months or every 3 years, depending on the risk level of the area, and do an audit and evaluation to make sure that those controls, they'll test those controls to make sure they're functioning properly. So they're intertwined, but the main thing is audit's got to be independent. They can't be responsible for executing the transaction. They can't be responsible for designing the controls. So they're going to test them and stay independent. Traditionally, the problem has been in those 3 lines of defense, even though they all have interlocking overlay, they all seem to operate independently, right? So the first line of operations, the first line of defense, usually evaluates and produces controls in their own way, right? And then the second line will probably come in and they'll look at monthly reports, or they'll have conversations with the first line and say, what are you doing in this area? Or they'll look and see some outliers in transactions and they'll follow up on those transactions. And they'll write the policies and procedures, right? So they do it in their own way, in their own little bubble. And then you get into audit. Audit sits there and designs their audit programs and their audit tests independently and don't necessarily communicate directly and, based on the controls they're designed. So they still have immediate input into, hey, here's how I make sure the controls are working effectively every week, kind of thing. So take those three areas, right? Does that make sense to you, the first, second, and third line?
Mm-hmm.
And their roles. So what happens a lot of times, let's take a situation where I'm planning an audit. Let's say I'm planning an audit of wire transfer. I look at the risks that I think in those wire transfers, and here's the controls I expect to be in place. So then I go out and I create an audit program that says I'm going to do these following 100 tests once a year, and I'm going to go out and grab a sample of transactions that happened over those years, and I'm going to apply those tests, right? So the second line, really, they come in and they say, okay, second line, I'm going to do an audit of your transactions in the wire transfer stuff, and we're going to be here a couple months doing that, and then at the end, we're going to give you an audit report, right? And so I write an analytics routine and an automated testing routine in audit to do all that stuff, right? Well, why couldn't we take that test and say, let's put it in the second line so they can test that every week or every month? They can push that button and do all those tests to see if they're functioning on a monthly basis, right? And then when the audit comes in and says, hey, listen, we ran your test every month because we automated them. And here you go, here's the results. Here were the outliers we found. Here's the steps we took to address those. The audit's going to come in and say, wow, this is great. We don't have to do our own tests. We may do a couple here just to make sure and confirm you did them right. And we're off and running, right? And so that's where I think we could take it with these things is that if we start building these types of things in the second line, who has 20,000 people, where the audit may only have 2,000 auditors, they have 20,000 people trying to keep up with these controls and risks and stuff like that. That they could have the tools they could use. They understand what the risks are. They're in alignment with what audit thinks the risks are. And now we're talking the same language. We're still keeping our independence. But what I'm doing is I understand how the auditor views what the risks are. As an operations person, I should make sure that I'm doing this much regularly. Today's world is, the risk management departments, they'll do arbitrary tests every once in a while and just kind of touch areas and make sure that they're not keeping up with it. They're chasing things. So when a problem pops up, they're chasing it down and finding the root cause. Whereas this shifts the whole scenario and says, listen, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to use auto insights to see some outliers pop up or some unusual transactions I can see. And I can look at that and I can do my job doing that versus all this heavy lifting of walking down the street to test this from file to file or whatever, or chasing my tail saying, hey, we had a big explosion happen and now we need to do some post-analysis of that, right? So that's where I think that, the evolution of the second line. The first line, it's a little bit harder because they're doing their operations. They're not necessarily designing the controls, but you could still sit there and say, okay, guys, in the second line, I've done my analysis, hand that down to the first line and say, okay, could you drill down to these transactions and tell me what broke down in your processes and fix those processes at your level. So they're giving the first line better information to do their job and making sure they're continuing to do their job effectively.
When we do, I'm just wondering, like, in accounting, a lot of times we do one step of the accounting process and then we hand it off to the next person who does another step that does another step. We bring a tool in like Alteryx in and it's like, actually, now we can just do all three steps in one person or something like that. Does that become something where you now have processes that can work between these different lines of defense and maybe create efficiencies in the way that it's always been done, if you will?
Yes and no. I mean, you got to be a little bit careful there because one of the key controls would be segregation of functions. So you want, for example, you may want a line person out there initiating the transaction. Somebody calls you up and says, I want to do a $100 million transfer to this bank. he calls up and he enters it, but he cannot approve it, right?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
you got to go to the next person. So sometimes you have to worry about that segregation of function. But I think in the most part, if you systemically create that control, and that control is out of one individual's hand, it works that way every time, then you're good. Yeah. So that would be good. But I think what you're really doing in my scenario is you're taking the objective to make sure you're managing risk effectively, and you're making it a common process of doing that, a much more effective process. It's a little better connected between the three lines than it is today. Because as a second line, I would surely hope I know exactly every audit control or a control that audit wants to see in place. I should know that. I should make sure I understand what the controls are and have the same view of that, and not, worry about the independence issue. I should know what kind of tests should be performed against that to confirm that those controls are working effectively. I know, why not put that test in the hands of the second line that could, do that on a monthly basis. They're doing it anyway. They're having to give assurances that the controls are working effectively every year. Why not, give them a tool that gives them a lot more confidence level that those controls are working effectively? And that's what we're basically doing. And then the auditors can use that as a control. Their control is that they're monitoring and doing these tests every month to make sure the control is working effectively. That's a control, an overriding control that's much more pervasive than that one control of just saying approvals happen properly, right? So
Yes.
It's just those types of things. So that's where you get it. It gets kind of convoluted. I'm sorry if I've probably confused you more than I've clarified it, but again, it's something I've seen consistently throughout my career, is those three lines of defense should be working much more effectively from 1 to 3, right?
Yeah,
and there's always been this independence concept, especially at the audit level, that have prevented them from kind of working seamlessly across there.
No, that makes sense. Talk a little bit more about you and I have discussed a lot about like what sort of this automation looks like, and what how you think you could take tools that, like Alteryx, for example, and help automate some of these. You've used the term bots. We'll just call them automations or whatever for now. But like, what's kind of your thought and vision around helping that? I don't know if I want to call it industry, but like sector risk management. Can you speak on some of your thoughts to that?
So here's how I see the evolution happening is, historically, when we started getting into analytics and audit, we would go out and hire a bunch of SQL programmers, right? Yeah. And somebody that go out and get the data, know how to grab the data and pull it in, and the auditor would say, okay, now I've got that. And we had limited resources and technology. Maybe, less than 1% of the entire department was dedicated to the, those personnel. So if we had, a 2,000 auditor, we may have 20 SQL programmers that support those 2,000 auditors, right? So it was very limited, right? And then the other thing that limited us was the auditors didn't know how to code, right? So every time they had to change something, they had to go back and rewrite that program. And then they didn't understand the concept of technology. The technology really wasn't there. I shouldn't say they didn't understand the concept of it, but the technology really wasn't there. So they were still taking those million transactions that they downloaded for you and doing a sample, putting it into their Excel spreadsheets, and picking a few transactions to test all their controls manually, right? Yep. So fast forward, now I've got a tool where I can build those tests and automate those tests, all right? So, and then the other thing that's happened is we've gone from heavy SQL code to no code tools. So where you can drag a module onto your screen, let's say you wanted to join two files. Historically, you would have to know all the syntax of SQL to do that, right? Today, you drag and drop a join module onto the screen, like in Alteryx, and all of a sudden you've got all this 200 lines of code that does the join for you, right? So it puts that capability into a non-technical user's hands to just drag and drop stuff onto a screen. So you got no code technology. So now when I want to change a parameter, let's say I want to, instead of testing things over 500 million, all I have to do is go in that module and change it from $100 million to $500 million. Bam, it's done. I can rerun that test in seconds, and now I can do it against 100% of the transactions, right? So now I've taken my audit test, and I go down to my audit program, and I say, what are the tests that I do that I point to a digital data? So like, for example, I'm going to do the authorization. I can go to the digital transaction, and I can see who authorized that in that transaction file. Then I can join it to an HR file to see who that person's ID is, right? Then I can attach that to a digital file from the security system to say what your authorization limits are, or what your authorization to get to that file is. So I can take those three files, join them together now in this no-code tool, and then I can key and say, okay, this person did the transaction. Let's look at this other file that says what's their transaction limits. And then I can look at a third file to say what's its ID, who's that person assigned to that ID. Then I can look at another transaction with security and say, do I have access to that to do that function within that application? I can do all those tests. That used to be like 5 different tests that 5 different auditors had to go chase down and see all those things and confirm those things. Now I can build that into a workflow in Alteryx, and I can say, pull all this data, weed out, massage the data, translate it into only what I want to see, and then execute this transaction test on me. And I can do all these tests. And I can do 15 tests in a matter of how long it takes that workflow to run. Usually it's a minute or so. In my experience, maybe 2 minutes to run through that entire workflow. And now I've done 14, 15 tests against that transaction, push a button. Hey, I got some false results, or I got, let's say they're false positives. I can go back in that routine and very easily change it so that I weed out those false positives, or, that type of thing. So taking something that used to take months to do that audit, now it's condensed that into a week. Because now the auditor can go out there and do his own build. He doesn't have to wait for that programmer with limited resources, only focused on the top 5 or 6 high-risk areas to do that automation for it. So,
do the tests change enough in between runs, or logically is it all fairly the same thing?
Great question.
Yeah.
So historically, they've stayed the same. For decades, we were doing the same wire transfer tests that we did. They pull up the audit program every 6 months to a year and execute those transactions, right? So now we take AI and pull this in, and we do some analytics and insight to what happened over the last 6 months to 12 months. Maybe new things popped up. Now I change my audit plan to say, hey, I've been comfortable with this control. It's worked great. Every year I've tested it, and now we're doing this automated test of it, and we never find any exceptions. Now I can adjust my audit plan and my audit scope a little bit to say, hey, I'm seeing some anomalies over here. Let's test out this area. Maybe I'm getting some errors in a certain country, so I can add a test to see how many transactions came errored from this particular area, region, or whatever. And then I can test dynamically. I can change my audit. I can be more dynamic as an auditor because I'm able to do these analytics much more effectively using AI and looking at some of those reports we were just looking at, right, that we just produced in 10, 15 minutes, that I can start doing and asking different kind of questions. Maybe sitting down with the auditee, the manager, the CFO, and saying, hey, we did this analysis this month, and we're seeing a lot more peak over the last 6 months, or a lot more red needles in this area. What's going on in the area? So it's that type of capabilities for the auditors now. They used to, for 10 years, follow the same audit program, doing sampling, to being much more proactive and getting ahead of the curve, getting ahead of the risk out there, getting ahead of the things that are happening in this new world. So that's the type of thing where I think most audit departments and most risk management areas are trying to get to, because they're just trying to hire people. They're trying to hire that workload, hire, and just manually beat the heck out of this stuff so they get ahead of it. And they're not being successful at it. Now we have these tools, and if they implement these tools, those people that they're hiring can now use more of up here than their legs to do their work, right?
Yeah.
They're spending much time thinking through it and asking those intuitive questions, like you did at the beginning of the thing in the what's called the playbook. Is maybe they ask a different question after they've looked through the first question. Now, give me this information about this region and that stuff, and get more specific and drill down into it. The capabilities that are now in their hands to do that is phenomenal. And it's just mind blowing. And it's the stuff that if you're not in that space, you're not getting the talent like we were talking about. You're not being innovative. You're not keeping ahead of the risk curves, all that type of stuff. It's sort of like what the cybersecurity folks do, right? Every time they close a hole with the hackers, another one's found, right? So if they just built this, software, Red Hat built their software code, or CrowdStrike built their software code to do the same thing for decades, and didn't continue to do that analysis part and say where the new holes seem to be coming, then they're behind the curve. That's kind of where, risk management and audit has historically been, is they're not keeping up with the curve. So they're tending to adjust after the hit's been taken, right? And so, I think where a lot of audit departments and risk management, second line folks are trying to get to is, I'm tired of taking the hits. How can we get in front of this stuff? And I think this is what these things bring, and in my mind can bring to these things. And, somebody like you and I could quickly bring to the table of how to do this and say, here's the model we've done. So in past audits we've built things that's called continuous audit. So we had high risk areas that we could now, every month we would run these routines that would spit out reports and say, okay, has the risk volume changed or risk level changed because, we see something's gone wrong. Like we had an outage or we had a change in a development process that caused the system to go down more often, or caused us not to, publish new updates to our cybersecurity software that's around our network, stuff like that. So it's things like that. We were now doing continuous audits. We didn't have to wait 12 months to identify that we had 12 months worth of problems. We were identifying on a monthly basis and sitting down with these guys and saying, listen, it looks clean. We've done our analysis. Looks like, we're not having new outliers that have got. So the value proposition for us as auditors that we were bringing to the organization is much greater. And to be doing those types of, I don't think many audit, third lines are doing that type of audits. And second lines are certainly, they should be, but they probably aren't doing that as much because they're spending too much time chasing the problem down and trying to get the root cause after it happened. So again, the technology, the drag and drop, the no code stuff, the automated workflows, the ability to pull files together, the ability to have things out in the cloud so you can access this much greater. I used to have to go to a wire transfer application programmer to have him run some code to pull file to the side that I could use off production, right? And today I've got, a data warehouse out there of the data sitting out so I don't affect production that I can tap into now. And these tools can tap in and connect to these kind of technologies. And I'm sure you've done a lot, I don't know, Databricks I've heard, and, all kinds of new data warehouse tools and stuff like that out there. Alteryx is built to connect to that technology no matter what it is, and be anonymous to it doesn't matter what type of platform an organization is using. Usually these tools have built-in connectors, right? And stuff like that to do it. So stuff that I didn't have in my hand 5 years ago, much less 10, 15 years ago when I started doing analytics and audit. So, and I would imagine most people haven't kept up or gotten up to speed.
Yeah. Platforms like Databricks or Snowflake are really interesting because they allow for you to both store in the same location and do the work on the same location. So if you're not using like a low code technology like Alteryx, and you let's say I want to take this Python code that we just generated and I wanted to run it within that organization, I don't have to. We probably have an entire podcast just about the cloud, but like traditionally, right? Like as if you've done work in the past, you're paying for. You've already paid for like the compute of a SQL server or right. So you can run as much as work as you want on there. And like you've already realized that now with cloud platforms like Snowflake and Databricks, if you want to egress that data out to do work somewhere else, then you have to pay for that movement of data. Where if you leave it all in the same space, you just have to pay for the processing of the data. So where you would be paying processing of the data in like an Alteryx cloud or something like that. Anyway, that's the benefits of those. But again, you need to be a little more technologically savvy to use them.
Yeah, and then historically for the second line, one of the challenges they had is they usually had to acquire a developer, set up a project with the development group, and be prioritized with all the other high, day-to-day operational development activities and projects, right? And so they would be low on the totem pole as far as that. They probably wouldn't get the dedicated services they need to build these types of things. And then, God forbid, if they had to go back and make a modification because some new regulation came out or something of that nature, they'd have to go through all that process. Well, in today's environment, you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to go through that. You can put the tools in the hands of these users without the risk and stuff that you would normally have as far as timelines and changes and stuff like that. So I think most second lines have kind of been behind the eight ball, not to their own fault, just because of the process that was given to them to try to do these types of things, right? And so they've kind of found the best way that they could achieve their goals with the resources and the capabilities that they had.
Yeah, and you make an important point there, and I'm going to wrap this up with this point where historically, it has been I as the business user have to push requirements onto someone technical, and then it's like this back and forth for however long it takes to build this process out. And now with technology, we like Alteryx, we talk about Alteryx a lot, but there are other technologies to do similar things where you can say, okay, I as the business user now have the control over this because someone else has done the engineering work on the front end to make sure that my data exists. Now I can do whatever I want on and so that's again the value of AI, the value of drag and drop tools, the value of low code, no code, the value of working better as an organization, etc. So Terry, I want to thank you for coming on.
No, it's been great.
Yeah, and I'm excited about it again in the future because I think we've opened up some other opportunities, things as we've talked about this. I've listened about like other directions I would love to chat with you on, and yeah, thanks for coming.
And I'm looking forward to drilling down more into that auto insights.
Yes. Yeah, we were going to do work on this. We ended up just talking about your world, and I think I appreciated that a lot more. But we can do a follow up with more work. So
okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Jason.
Yeah. Bye.
Talk to you later.
Thank you everyone who made it this far. Follow-up video coming out the next few weeks. Just as a reminder, my name is Trayson Marks, DeMar Consulting Group, Trayson at DeMarConsultingGroup.com. If you have any questions about this space, risk management, or any other analytics, or just want to shoot the breeze, feel free to email me or reach out on LinkedIn. And I'd be more than happy to talk to you about any of this stuff. Or if you want to come on the podcast, we'd love to talk to you, and looking for more opportunities to learn more.